led.
North Texas Congressman Michael Burgess said President Bush led a life of humble leadership, courage, and conviction. He went on to say there is no doubt that the state of Texas, the United States of America, and the global community are better because George H.W. Bush was in it, and we are grateful to his family for sharing him with us.
And before the death of former President Bush, NBC5 senior investigator Scott Friedman and myself spoke with Congressman Burgess about the events happening in Washington, D.C., from the Democrats preparing to take the majority next year to questions about a potential government shutdown. Let's start with this. You envision a shutdown next week?
No, I don't. I can't rule out that there may be a temporary funding bill before the more complete funding bill happens, but for right now, I don't anticipate a shutdown.
Congressman, the border wall was obviously a huge issue in this last campaign. Is the wall negotiable? We know the Republicans and Democrats are far apart right now on spending for that.
You know, I'm not sure that is entirely accurate. In my opinion, the wall does need to happen, and I believe the president's request is for $5 billion in this spending bill, and I believe he ought to get that. And look, we saw so many of the images over the weekend where the so-called secure fence was just not doing the job, and people were actually pushing up against the fence and pushing through the fence. The wall is a critical part of our infrastructure as far as border security is concerned, and I believe the president will get what he's asking for.
Congressman, if he doesn't, the president has said, reportedly has said that he would be open to a shutdown. Do you think that there will be a shutdown over this wall?
No, I don't. Again, Julie, I can't rule out a short-term funding bill the deadline is December 7th. Will everything be worked out by December 7th? It could possibly take a little longer than that, but it shouldn't take much longer than that. So another short-term funding for a number of days is possible. But I don't think anyone wants to see the government shut down. We did see Senator Schumer a year ago push that to the point where a short shutdown did ensue, but I think everyone walked away from that exercise realizing that none of us looked like winners in that exchange, and this just needs to get done.
We hear a lot about disagreement in Washington. Where do you see areas of agreement right now between the two parties?
Well, there have been a number of areas of agreement. Look, we've got our pandemic hazard preparedness bill that has been sitting over in the Senate for a few weeks. I believe that will get done. It passed out of our committee in a bipartisan fashion earlier this year. It has passed on the floor of the House in a bipartisan fashion. You saw the committee work in a bipartisan fashion on some of the legislation regarding the opiate crisis, and then the Senate came to the same conclusion. So there are plenty of good news stories that have happened in the past year. For the most part, they're underreported because when we don't fight, it's not a story.
Let's talk about the changes coming to Washington, D.C. in January. You have served before when Republicans were in the minority. They will be in the minority again. What do you envision the next 2 years looking like?
Well, the Republicans will be in the minority in the House of Representatives, but not in the United States Senate. So that is different from when Democrats were in the majority in 2007 and again 2009. Both of those Congresses, the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate, and then obviously for the first 2 years of President Obama's administration, they controlled all three branches, and they had a 60-vote majority in the Senate. It will not be that type of arithmetic going into January. In some ways, our friends on the Democratic side of the House of Representatives will get to experience our frustration in dealing with the Senate. The Senate is famous for slow walking things, so I know the new Democratic House of Representatives is coming to town full of enthusiasm and excitement about the things they're going to get done, but it can be a difficult situation even under the best of circumstances working with the United States Senate. And then, you know, I guess I would say further, obviously President Trump is a difference in that equation as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the president did not veto perhaps one or two bills that were sent his way. That, I think, could be expected in a scenario where the Democrats control the House and the Republicans control the Senate and the White House. It would be relatively straightforward for the House of Representatives to sustain a presidential veto. We have the numbers to do that. So any number of things are possible as we go into the next term.
Let's talk for a minute about things back at home in Texas. Coming out of this midterm election, what do you make of where the Republican Party stands right now in the state, and where do you see the future going?
Well, the Republican Party is still very strong in the state of Texas. There were some races that didn't go our way, but I think the vast majority of races did. And from a statewide perspective, the major offices are still held by Republicans. My two counties, Denton and Tarrant, perhaps may be a little less Republican, but they're still very, very much conservative counties, regardless of the political label that you place. So I can't tell you that there's going to be significant changes. Obviously, politics is of its very nature an ever-evolving process. So there are a number of folks who I suspect will reevaluate how they are positioned in their various districts. For me, it's always been about constituent service. We try to get an A+ every single day we're out there on constituent service. And as you know, it's been my custom and experience to make myself accessible and available to constituents. I do open town halls. I suspect I will continue to do those in the next 2 years ahead.
Congressman Burgess, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sure enough, Julie, thank you.